blue skies are all but gone, Bethany. They're all but gone. And people don't seem to notice because they're too busy looking down at their electronic appendages. So, but again, we face a near-term existential threat. I'm not hanging everything over the neck of geoengineering because, again, we've been very bad stewards of this planet. Where would I start? But these intentional operations are pounding the final nails into our near-term collective coffins if this continues. The gravity of what's unfolding cannot be overstated.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Digestive podcast. I'm your host, Bethany Cameron. This may be the most important podcast you will ever listen to. I don't say that lightly. I have been waiting to get Dane Wigington on the show for a while, and it finally happened as he is here with us today, not only to discuss weather manipulation, but expose and provide proof and evidence that we are, in fact, being sprayed with chemicals, aluminum, and being controlled by authorities that affect infertility, fatal sicknesses, our overall health, our soil, crops, animals, the recent LA fires, the Maui and Paradise fires, current and past snowstorms and hurricanes, and how these, quote, natural disasters are being manipulated all for power, money, and control. We need to wake up, and if you think this is all a conspiracy, listen until the very end until you decide. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments if you are listening on YouTube or if you are listening on Apple or Spotify. Leave your thoughts as a review because I do in fact read them and would love to hear your opinion. If you struggle with infertility, acne, mold, digestive issues, brain fog, sleep disturbances, or just have unexplained health symptoms you can't get to the bottom of, this may not only be an eye-opener, but perhaps the eye-opener to questions you've had for years about your health. Without further ado, let's get right into the episode. So thank you so much, Dane, for coming on the show today, because this is a long-awaited interview. And I think every single person, wherever you are in the United States and beyond, needs to hear what's happening that I think a lot of people think is maybe, quote, conspiracy theory. And so I'm glad that you're on here because you are a very expert in this field. Now, before we even get into the nitty-gritty, I like to start my podcast off with rapid fire yes or no questions. And I have about 5 here, and you can only answer yes or no. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, first question. Is the weather being engineered?
Yes.
Are we being sprayed?
Yes.
Do you have proof that aluminum is being sprayed in the air?
Yes.
Is climate change real?
Yes.
Last question. Can the military create natural disasters such as hurricanes, snowstorms, and floods?
Yes.
If you love grain-free cookies and crackers like I do, then you probably are already a consumer of Simple Mills. Well, I've got some news for you. This month's giveaway, Simple Mills has agreed to gift a 3-month supply of their cookies and crackers. Yes, you heard me. A 3-month supply will be given to someone who simply rates and reviews this podcast in whatever podcast app you listen in. Simple Mills has been a staple in my home since 2018, and since then, they have evolved in creating some amazing grain, gluten, and refined sugar-free cookies and crackers for those with food sensitivities, but also just for those wanting a healthier alternative without the chemicals, gums, dyes, and artificial sweeteners commonly found in today's snacks. So just give this podcast a 5-star rating and review, and you could be the winner. At the end of this month, I'll be announcing the winner in an episode, so listen in so you don't miss the announcement. You could be the winner of a 3-month supply of Simple Mills. I have a question for you. How long have you had your mattress? If you can't remember, then that's a good indication to perhaps look for a new one. My husband and I just got a new mattress from Birch, and I cannot recommend Birch mattress enough. Not only are their mattresses non-toxic and Green Guard certified, they're also an Eco Institute tested product. Plus, Birch owns their own manufacturing facility and relies on skilled manufacturers to produce the highest quality mattress using natural materials like organic wool, organic cotton, and natural latex that is Green Guard Gold certified to ensure safety and low emissions. Plus, it's hypoallergenic and antimicrobial. Birch mattresses are shipped directly from their facility to your door for free. They believe so strongly in their mattresses that each one includes a 25-year warranty. I want all my listeners to not only enjoy a deep, restful night's sleep, but also peace of mind, knowing your mattress is mold-free as you sleep on a Birch. Go to birchliving.com/digest for 27% off site-wide. That's 27% off site-wide if you go to birchliving.com/digest. Magnesium is responsible for over 600 different biochemical reactions in the body. It helps you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and have more peaceful nights. It also supports stress management, muscle recovery, helps reduce and prevent muscle cramps, and is needed to help build strong bones and aids in regular bowel movements. But note, not all magnesium is created equal. In fact, there are several different types of magnesium. Sadly, most magnesium supplements on the market only contain 2 to 3 versions, but Bioptimizers contains all 7 forms, conveniently all in one easy-to-swallow capsule. No mixing, which means these are highly convenient when traveling as well. Bioptimizer's magnesium breakthrough is soy-free, gluten-free, vegan, and the best part is that Bioptimizers has a 365-day money-back guarantee. So, if you want to nurture your mind and your body with this all-natural, full-spectrum magnesium supplement, go to bioptimizers.com/digest and use code DIGEST. Again, that's bioptimizers.com/digest and use code DIGEST at checkout to save 10%. Why don't you introduce yourself, explain to people who you are and what you do?
My name is Dane Wigington. I'm the lead researcher for geoengineeringwatch.org. We're the largest website in the world on the subject of climate engineering, geoengineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection. Those are all terms for what is taking place in our skies. We're non-political. We don't sell anything. I simply made this my mission to try to expose this issue because the public has a right to know that they are the subjects of a grand and lethal experiment, a climate engineering Manhattan project, which is already producing grave consequences. And this is not to say that we haven't damaged the planet in many other ways, but when you intentionally intervene in the climate system, Bethany, you derail the planet's ability to respond to the other sources of damage done. And this is not something being done benevolent. I want to make that clear. These operations are ultimately about power and control and keeping business as usual and keeping a population oblivious to the true state, the true extent of damage already done, while at the same time inflicting even more damage. And all of the materials being used are highly toxic.
It's insane. So I've been seeing so many chemtrails, and there's the argument that, oh, those are just contrails. The chemtrails aren't real. So first of all, can you explain the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail and what we're seeing here?
What I would suggest, we're playing chess. We need to learn how to play well. So especially dealing with agencies or media or elected officials, imperative use the science term and avoid the chemtrails term like the plague. That's a term is fine for personal conversations, but it is the instant marginalization term. If people are new to this issue and they go and Google the term chemtrails, all they find is conspiracy theory and hoax. If they Google the term geoengineering, climate engineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, they find mountains of science data. And by using those terms, agencies and media can't so easily marginalize us. So again, and I'll give one example. Arizona Congressman Kelly Ward went to a chemtrails meeting and they immediately labeled her Chemtrails Kelly, and it really derailed her whole career. So again, we just need to play chess well. It's a game of semantics in some senses. In regard to what we're seeing in our skies, it is truly profound that people have abandoned their sense of logic, reason, and eyesight. We have up close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. End of discussion, end of debate. This is not, quote, condensation. We know all military tankers and all commercial carriers aircraft are high bypass turbofan jet engines. It's a jet powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. That engine by design is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances. And again, aside from all this data, people need to reactivate their sense of reason and logic. You don't have grid patterns in the sky one day and nothing the next if something's not going on. You don't have one aircraft leaving a trail from horizon to horizon next to one leaving nothing. One is obviously dispersing. And our skies, the blue skies, are all but gone, Bethany. They're all but gone. And people don't seem to notice because they're too busy looking down at their electronic appendages. So again, we face a near-term existential threat. I'm not hanging everything over the neck of geoengineering because, again, we've been very bad stewards of this planet. Where would I start? But these intentional operations are pounding the final nails into our near-term collective coffins if this continues. The gravity of what's unfolding cannot be overstated.
Okay, so I have so many questions. So I asked, is the weather being engineered? Is it being controlled? And you said yes.
I want to make this clear. This is a caveat in regard to, say, for example, a hurricane. Is what is much more definitive for us to state, although the climate engineers can and are manipulating atmospheric pressure zones with weapons of mass destruction like HAARP in Alaska. Many people have heard of HAARP, acronym is HAARP, and that's an ionosphere heater. It is an incredibly covert weapon of mass destruction. It transmits 3.6 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere, creating a chain reaction that can magnify that power by 1,000 times or more, heats that layer of the atmosphere, causes the atmosphere to expand up and down. The downward push causes a high pressure heat dome. And they can, by manipulating these pressure zones, they could, in practice, create conditions that are conducive to spawning a cyclonic rotation like a hurricane. But aside from that, nature certainly can do the same. And the oceans are scaldingly hot. Certainly hurricanes can form in that way. But are they manipulating and steering these storms, including hurricanes? Absolutely, positively, yes. And I would encourage your listeners, this is done with frequency transmission networks like the NextRad network within the continental US. We've recorded this in real time as it's happening. Hurricane Harvey, Michael, Maria, Ian, and Helene recently. We recorded Helene as it was wreaking havoc in North Carolina. If your listeners search geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes, and preferably on a platform other than Google, Google's doing everything they can to mask and hide our data. But they are positively manipulating these storms. In regard to precipitation, climate engineering is much more effective even at cutting off precipitation than augmenting it. But they can and are doing both. And we're seeing agricultural regions targeted positively. We can see the activity on satellite images, and we can speculate on the agendas and objectives being carried out, all of which appear to be nefarious at best. But the fact that this is going on, Bethany, is absolutely inarguable.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point too, that, hurricanes and storms and dryness and things, they're not all caused by a push of a button or even a push of a button. Like, obviously they happen naturally, but as you had mentioned, people, and I want to get into who's doing this, and they are manipulating in a way that are naturally pushing the weather in that if they didn't manipulate it otherwise. Is that safe to say?
Yes. And for example, we know that based on the laws of physics, the atmosphere carries 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. Based on unfiltered frontline data, it appears we're somewhere in the range of 3.5 C over baseline. That's 6+ degrees Fahrenheit over baseline. Those temperatures are being masked. They're trying to keep the public from panicking until the last possible moment while inflicting even more damage at the same time. So with that additional moisture being carried by the atmosphere, we we must have more overall precipitation on the planet based on the laws of physics, but we don't. Why don't we? Because there's an element in this equation we're not being told about. That element is climate engineering. It's thwarting the evaporative cycle, the hydrological cycle. It's completely derailed at this point. So at this point, nothing can be considered truly natural. Yes, if this stopped, we would have natural variances in weather, but once you disrupt the system, you disrupt the entire system. So can we say at this point any event that happens anywhere at any particular time can be considered truly natural? We can't at this point. And they're trying so desperately to hide this because obviously the liability ramifications are beyond calculation. Once the public knows this has been done to them, every single climate cataclysm then becomes a potential liability for those in power. So again, they're going to try to hide this until the last possible moment.
All right. Well, I think I have $2 million questions, and I'm just going to dive right in. One, who's responsible for this? And two, why are they doing it?
Those who print the money is where all roads lead. They control militaries, thus they control countries, they control all so-called elected offices. The last elected official to truly draw a line in the sand with those in power was JFK, and he lived about a week after he did so. And everyone since then is just one form or another of power structure, orchestrated, polarizing, division, keep everybody distracted from the oncoming train. And when I say oncoming train, our current reality is very close to capsizing, and very few realize that. We're in the Thelma and Louise moment. We've gone through the guardrail, we're hurtling through the air, and the bottom line is very few have any idea what's about to unfold, or it's already unfolding. So on the agenda of why, that's a complex question. It's not a simple this or that, just like the state of the climate is not a simple this or that. And that's, while I'm on that subject, the effectiveness that those in power have had on dividing the population on the state of the climate is something we need to hurdle. We need to build bridges, not burn them. So our premise at geoengineeringwatch.org is we can't have any legitimate discussion about climate, anything, from any perspective without addressing this issue first, because they've successfully divided one segment of the population into believing if you mention climate engineering, you're denying all the other forms of damage. We're not doing that. We're saying, how do we address anything without addressing this biggest part of the equation first? Another side of the demographic does acknowledge climate engineering, but denies all other forms of damage, and that's certainly not rational either. So we need to build bridges. We need to focus on this issue first. On agendas and objectives, this is the crown jewel weapon of the military-industrial complex. Think about this. They can bring populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault and blame it on nature. They've been doing so for decades, doing this in Africa, for example, forcing countries to their knees, cutting off their precipitation, and then forcing U.S. occupation. Bethany, this is a long time ago. You may not remember this, but right after 9/11, General Wesley Clark, NATO Supreme Commander, was given a list of Middle Eastern countries that were to be targeted because of the 9/11 event as a premise. That was the new Pearl Harbor for the U.S., by the way. It was the excuse they needed to go loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute in that part of the world. But every single one of those countries subsequently underwent a once in 1,000 year drought. Their precipitation was cut off, which destabilizes food production, which then destabilizes the population. And we have the leaders of those countries, in the case of Iran, on the floor of the United Nations stating NATO was cutting off their precipitation. And again, this is not speculation or theory or hypothesis. This is the fact that these programs can do this is historical record. We have Project Popeye in Vietnam that was so successful at controlling precipitation that by the 70s, there were international treaties passed forbidding these operations. So again, this is historical record. There's no speculation involved here. This is a weapon of power and control.
So basically, the people in power are doing this to have more control and more power, like as a blanket statement. I mean, I have my own thoughts and theory why, and maybe I'd like to share that with you and to see, what you think. But I think part of it, maybe not all, but I think part of it is if you can control the weather. First of all, then there's less soil nutrients. You're killing the soil microbiome and ultimately making humans sicker to rely on medication, which creates the government and making more money because people are paying the government and meds because the pharmaceutical industry is intertwined. And like I go down that rabbit hole, but I think, man, if we're sicker, then that's just making the pharmaceutical industry more money because we're paying for meds. And then obviously we're not getting the nutrients because the weather's being manipulated and all these things from the crops. And I mean, I could go down that that whole thing too about like we're being sprayed, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, you're completely correct. You're completely correct. And you're completely justified in going down that rabbit hole. And it's much deeper still than that. So yes, are there disaster capitalists that are profiting from a increasingly sick and debilitated population? Absolutely. And even beyond that, those in power have a much easier time manipulating a sick and debilitated population. That is all part of this equation. For those that don't realize, and this is where we're stuck between a hammer and an anvil, between a clinically insane power structure, literally. That's not being facetious. We know from psychoanalysis of those in power that they have a common deficiency, and that deficiency is this: a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. Because many ask, well, this can't be going on because they wouldn't do this to themselves. They already have. We've detonated 2,400 nuclear bombs without public consent. That's contaminated everything on the planet. We have Fukushima, triple nuclear meltdown, no technology to fix it, no end in sight. We have 442 more nuclear plants to go that will melt down when society collapses, and we're building 60 more. There's no sanity in this equation, but we're also caught between a population that doesn't want to know the truth. Those in power know that the planet can no longer support 8+ billion people. Ecosystems around the globe are completely collapsing. Crops, fisheries, everything from plankton to insects, all collapsing, wildlife collapsing. When I say collapsing, I mean collapsing. Insect populations, we were one of the first sources to publish, based on our work with former government scientists, that insect populations were collapsing. We did that in 2012. 80 to 90% of terrestrial and aquatic insects gone now. Science community tried to marginalize geoengineeringwatch.org, and now they've had to admit to it. Your listeners can search insect apocalypse. And my point is this: how long do we think we're going to be here if the insects can't survive? Plankton populations down 90% in the Atlantic based on peer-reviewed study of 500 locations. That's an immediate existential threat. And we're all pretending that some puppet we put in the White House is going to make any damn difference. It's all designed to polarize again. And we're trained, aren't we, Bethany, to think, well, you're either on the red team or the blue team. It's one or the other, right? No, they're both two sides of the same coin, very different appearing to the population. They think, oh, this time it's different. No, it's not. You have the same controllers, the money printers running all of it. So again, back to the motives and what you stated, and you're completely correct. The debilitated population is a part of the objectives here, and there are many objectives. And if I can summarize two that would back up everything you stated. You said to control populations, you're correct. At the beginning of the geoengineeringwatch.org weekly commercial-free radio update, we pay for these broadcasts around the country out of pocket. No commercials, no sponsors. It's posted on the homepage of Geoengineering Watch every week. It's called Global Alert News. The beginning 20 seconds is film footage of former U.S. President Lyndon Johnson in 1962, 63 years ago, ranting like a lunatic, saying we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and quote, exactly as you said, Bethany, he who controls the weather controls the world. How far have we come since that point? And if I could add this to it, former U.S. presidential advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski advised presidents from Johnson, no coincidence, all the way up to 2017 when he thankfully finally died. He stated on the record, and I quote verbatim, with today's technology, it's much easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. Think about that.
Dang. I
President's
mean, do you think this is you? I said we're being sprayed, and you have proof that we are being sprayed with aluminum, like aluminum is in the air. And I want to get into that, but quick question. Do you think this is for affecting, I mean, infertility is the highest it's ever been. Do you think this is affecting infertility?
No question. There's no question about that, because it's not just aluminum. What's shown up in lab tests: aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, surfactants, polymer fibers, and graphene. These are all highly toxic elements. And when you combine these elements, you get what's called synergistic toxicity. So with the polymer fibers, and your listeners can look this up, I encourage them to do so. And yes, we have decomposing plastics around the world. We know that. But when you have a ubiquitous contamination of polymer nanoparticles around the world, and I mean everywhere from North Pole, South Pole, top of Mount Everest, and those particles appear to be of a manufactured size and nature, that's related to something else, and that something else is climate engineering, because these particles are named in climate engineering patents. And now we have peer-reviewed study to prove that these particles are showing up everywhere in the human system, from brains, organs, placentia, everywhere. It's building up in all of us. We're inhaling this with every breath we take. And in regard to the testing we do, it's not just precipitation testing. And we've worked with institutions like the University of Minnesota, internationally recognized agriculture institution. And our film, The Dimming, which we spent a significant amount of resource on, well into six figures, we posted that the day it was done for free. We're in this to win this fight. And that's the only reason why we're in this mission. And in that film, we took a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab, which we acquired at great effort and expense. No one will ever get access to that again. We know that. We put top scientists in it, took it to altitude, sampled what heavy aircraft were emitting, all on film, all on the record, processed that at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, internationally recognized testing institution, found exactly what we knew we would find, starting with aluminum nanoparticles. And for those that don't know, bioavailable aluminum is toxic to all life, period, no exceptions.
Wow. Yeah. And I did watch that documentary, The
Thank you.
Dimming. If anyone has not seen it, just go on YouTube, type in The Dimming. It is an amazing documentary. I think it's been out for how many years? I think like 6 years or no?
Three
It
plus.
3+.
And in
Okay.
spite of massive social media censorship, it's more relevant now than it was the day we put it out. But in spite of social media censorship, we've reached 25 million views and counting.
Definitely everyone listening needs to watch this documentary. It is well worth your time, The Dimming. Now, going back to being sprayed with like aluminum or other particles too. Now, I have heard of aluminum resistant crops. Have you heard of that? Where,
Absolutely.
okay, so basically for those listening, crops are being, quote, bred to resist the sprays of these chemicals. And what is your take on that?
Well, first, you're very well versed. You've done some homework here, and thank you for that. That makes our exchange so much more productive. And you're completely correct. They've engineered genetically modified crops to be aluminum resistant because root systems, when they sense this toxin, they shut down nutrient uptake to protect their DNA. So when we see forests dying around the globe, and they are, and we see like in North American forest, the so-called experts blaming the beetles. The beetles are a symptom of a sick, dead, dying tree. You mentioned soil microbiome earlier, quite correctly so. So when this toxic rain, and it is toxic, it's sterilizing the soils, literally. It's killing the root systems. Now, every time the wind blows, trees are tipping over. The root systems are flipping right out of the ground because the root systems are dying back, just like the crowns are dying back. This is killing everything. It's literally killing everything from the clouds to the ground. And your listeners can see this on The Dimming, Bethany, as you would have seen at an international climate engineering conference in 2010. I cornered the world's most recognized climate engineer, Dr. David Keith, after a 3.5-hour symposium of him pushing what he pretended was a proposal, even though these programs have been active for decades, of dumping tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the sky, quite cavalierly pushing this. And they only allowed about 3 questions from 100 researchers and journalists in the room. And I was one of those questions. And my question to him was, have you studied the toxicological effects of doing this? And his first response, and again, this is all on film on the record in The Dimming. Well, he said, there's a lot of particle matter in the atmosphere, a little more won't hurt. And I cornered him then and said, that particle matter isn't aluminum. Have you studied aluminum? And he paused and he said, ultimately said, no. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. What kind of an answer is that from the world's most recognized climate engineer? Of course he knows aluminum is toxic. And again, we have peer-reviewed study from the world's most recognized aluminum researchers that have now been fired. They're trying to sweep anybody that's exposing this under the rug. that there would be no Alzheimer's or dementia in the normal human lifespan of up to 100 years without that one element. Think about that. And we're sucking it up with every breath we take. It's in every rain test we take now.
Nobody likes to talk about poop, constipation, or even diarrhea, but it's pretty common over on my Instagram and on this podcast. So I'm not really shy to talk about these things because we all do it and we all have experienced it or maybe going through it right now. And if you feel you have poor gut health and your immunity is suppressed, there's actually a huge link. Poor gut health has not only been linked to poor immunity, but also depression, anxiety, brain fog, low energy, skin issues, including acne. And studies are now coming out that our gut microbiome is linked to obesity and type 2 diabetes. I feel like I talk about gut health way too much, but at the same time, not enough. And I definitely feel like I don't talk about Seed enough. And Seed is a partner of mine that I started taking their probiotics, oh gosh, maybe over 2 years ago now. It's their DS-01 Symbiotic Capsule, which is a pre and probiotic all in one. And there's no refrigeration needed, so you can take it on the go, you can travel with it, and you don't have to think about where you need to store it. I mean, if you really think about it, if you are taking a refrigerated probiotic capsule, how is that going to survive your 98.6 body temperature once it gets down in there, right? So you have to really look and see how are these probiotics going to survive. So you definitely want a soil-based probiotic, and that is exactly what Seed is. So I highly recommend you giving them a shot. If you're one of the millions that have been on the fence about Seed and have been curious, now is the time because my listeners get 25% off their first month, and you can cancel anytime, even right after if you want to. Just go to seed.com/digest and use code 25digest to get 25% off your first month. That's 25% off your first month of Seed's DS-01 Daily Symbiotic at seed.com/digest and use code 25digest. I want to give every one of you a gift. So many of you know I created my own digestive support protein powder designed to aid in gut health, specifically formulated for those with sensitive tummies. It's made with pure European yellow pea protein, where we even take the extra step into removing the lectins, which are the anti-nutrients found in peas and legumes, and often what makes people bloated when consuming them. And because we source our pea protein from Europe, I can assure you it's not sprayed with glyphosate because it's actually illegal in Europe to spray pea crops with such chemicals. I pour out my heart and soul into this podcast, my Instagram and social media outlets, and of course, put so much sweat and tears into creating the Bethany's Pantry line of digestive support powders. My protein contains no stevia, no monk fruit, no gums, fillers, no natural flavors, or gut irritants. So thank you for continuing to support my mission to provide cleaner options for those needing alternative sources for their health. It truly means so much. And to express my gratitude, I want to offer every single one of you a one-time $10 off discount. Just go to bethanysPantry.com, which is our new website, by the way, and use the code podcast10 for $10 off anything. Again, go to our brand new website, bethanysPantry.com, and use the code podcast10 for $10 off anything. This is a one-time use code, so use it wisely. It makes me so sad because everyone is doing the best that they can, eating all the right foods, doing all the right things for fertility, Alzheimer's, prevention of all these different diseases, and yet they have no control when they walk outside their home and just breathe this.
Exactly. That's why we're so focused on this issue. If you can't breathe without sucking up this toxic plethora of elements, that's a fight for life right here, right now. And what a joke organizations like the Alzheimer's organizations are. Absolute travesty when they have members of the aluminum industry on their board. I tried to hire an informational booth at an Alzheimer's event with a sizable donation, which is what's normally required, just simply to pass out information on aluminum toxicity. And they patently refused allowing me to do that. I showed up at the event anyway, and they threatened to arrest me. I invited them to do so. That would give us even more publicity. And they backed off. And we passed out a lot of data at that particular event, but we have the foxes running the hen house across the board, members of the aluminum industry on the Alzheimer's Foundation board.
Okay, so what does that tell you, to my listeners? If something or someone is being suppressed, doesn't that give you an inclination? I feel that this is actually true. Like, you think about like censorship. Okay, if something is being censored or taken down, doesn't that give you a hint that that's actually like good information? Like, if it's not actually true, and this is just in my own thought process, like,
Well, you're correct.
why is it being censored then? Just let it be, let it, whatever it is. You know,
You're
there's a
correct.
reason why it's being taken down.
When something's completely outlandish and discrediting, they allow that to run free because that discredits online everything. But when something is accurate, and geoengineeringwatch.org, we're the largest site on this subject in the world by far, with almost 50 million visitors to date. We were top of the first page of Google because of our rankings. And then literally overnight, this is about 4 years ago, Google disappeared us overnight, gone. You can, if you search because if you search the term geoengineering, we were the top of the first page. And now if you search our exact website title, yes, you can find us if you look hard enough, but we should be top of the first page for the term geoengineering. And literally happened overnight. And we sued, by the way, the scientist that was solely responsible for getting the dimming censored on Facebook. His name is Dr. Douglas McMartin. He represents MIT, Carnegie Science, Cornell, and Caltech. He is a climate engineering cover-up actor. That's his task. And we sued him, and we knew the system would probably side with him, and they did. And their excuse for why he was not responsible for malice, because you're supposed to be an independent third-party fact checker. He was an independent third party. I debated him on air, live radio, and mopped the floor with him because the data is on our side, period. He carried a vendetta for many years and then executed that vendetta by getting me censored. And he should be liable for that. And the courts of the tainted US court system exempted him because they considered me a public figure. What does that have to do with anything? He's responsible he's not an independent fact checker, and he's keeping data from the public. The public has a right to know. But it did get covered by Bloomberg News. Your listeners could find that. And it did send a shot across the bow of people like him because they knew geoengineeringwatch.org was crazy enough to sue them for their actions, no matter what the courts did or didn't do. So we're trying in every way we can to bring this to light, but should not those people like McMartin or media that are participating in the cover-up of these crimes, should they not be liable also?
Oh, this is ridiculous. Well, for anyone listening, I'll be sure to put all those links in today's show notes so that, you can easily find it with just a simple tap in case you guys want to research it more. And I highly recommend you do. How often are we being sprayed? How is it, daily, hourly, weekly? I look out in the sky and I see it all day long. And I live in Southern California.
It's 24/7 in around the globe. It's not concentrated in any specific location all the time. It depends on the weather systems and what they're trying to accomplish. So I'm sure you just saw the freak flash snowstorms, New Orleans, Florida. That is the epitome of blatant climate engineering operations. By the way, those locations are now at record high temperatures. How many people know that? So they've whiplashed this is a chemically nucleated material. This is not a natural event in any way, shape, or form. You don't make a snowstorm off moisture that came off the record warm Gulf of Mexico without a whole lot of chemicals being in that mix. And it's a very different material than naturally nucleated snow. I grew up in Southern California as well, at the base of the San Gabriel Mountains. In Upland, California, I spent a lot of time in those mountains in the snow, and this material now is completely different. So what weren't we told? When they were sensationalizing The blizzard, literally a blizzard warning in New Orleans. What weren't we told? At that same window of time, Bethany, it was well above freezing and raining in Alaska, in Greenland, in Iceland, in Siberia, and Moscow, while there was a blizzard in New Orleans. Think about that. The planet's in total meltdown. Climate engineering is making it far worse, not better, in the attempt to hide it and sensationalize what they just did in New Orleans and Florida. Every meteorologist that can walk and chew gum knows this is going on, but they have no courage. And now we have a federal gag order on the National Weather Service and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Why would our government feel the need to gag the nation's weathermen if there wasn't something colossal to hide?
All right, well, let's talk about it. So there's gag orders on the weather, like not the TV weathermen?
No,
Or
no, they
no.
do what they're told because to protect their paychecks and pensions. They're simply cowards. But as far as the nation's weathermen, National Weather Service and NOAA, and they're all reading scripts, by the way, all of them. Who's doing the weather modeling for the nation's weathermen, which is passed all the way down to the local meteorologist? Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, private defense contractors that are neck deep in climate engineering patents and operations because they need the narrative to match. And you have power structure entities that own Weather Channel, Weather Central, Weather Nation. They need to control the narrative, and they are. And the public needs to wake up to the fact that, I mean, this is so incredibly widespread, this cancer of control of what's happening in our skies, and the ramifications again are so vast. It's not only contaminating everything, but Bethany, does the sun feel very, very intense on your skin of late? Have you noticed when you're in?
This was one of my questions, and this is a perfect time to bring it up, is, we all know that sun exposure is beneficial. There's vitamin D and all these things, but with all this weather manipulation, is sun exposure a little bit more damaging to our skin now more than ever, or
Yes,
no?
yes. We've had he just passed away, but we've had a former NASA contract engineer with state-of-the-art UV metering equipment that we supplied him at over five figures. Geoengineering Watch supplied him. We are getting UVC on the surface. That's a DNA damaging spectrum of UV radiation. It's killing insects, it's killing plankton, it's certainly causing cancers in humans. And to explain the notion that the ozone layer is getting better is a complete lie. It's absolute deception. Geoengineering is the greatest single causal factor for ozone layer destruction. You have not only the oxidizing particles being dispersed into our skies, but the frequency transmissions used to manipulate those particles are also destroying the ozone layer. So based on his final readings, we had this is only going back about 6 months, there's about 30% of the ozone layer remaining, not 30% gone, 30% remaining. No ozone layer, no more terrestrial life on Earth. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can't grow food anymore, and that's already showing up. Plankton are lost. That's the base of the food chain on planet Earth. We're down to 30% right now on average around the globe. I mean, you can see the effects. It's burning the bark off of trees. And if you search geoengineering ozone destruction, you have the climate science community acknowledging if we were to geoengineer, it would destroy the ozone layer. They know this, but they're not admitting that it's ongoing already. So you have, in the UV spectrum, we're told 95% of incoming UV is UVA. We're told 5% is UVB. We're told UVC stops 100,000 feet up. And what's below UVC? X-ray. Obviously, we know how bad that is. And we now think we're seeing signs that some X-ray may be reaching the surface as well. Ozone layer is unimaginably thin. If you compress it to a single molecular layer, it's about 6 millimeters thick. It's unimaginably thin. That's what allows us to live here on this planet. And we're destroying it in the attempt for those in power to retain that power and to mask the damage. This is the paradox, trying to mask the damage already done while at the same time inflicting more damage, putting up this particle cloud cover to block some of the sun's thermal radiation, which is destroying what's left of the ozone layer, which releases even more thermal energy. It's the pharmaceutical cure, right? Take this for that, and here's 20 side effects, and here's 20 more pharmaceuticals with 100 more side effects. It's that kind of mentality, and they're profiting off this, and those profiting don't seem to care that we're not going to be here long if we continue on the current course.
This is insane. It goes back to power and money, people wanting us getting sick so that we pay to quote, put a Band-Aid on whatever ailment we have. So is it safe to say that these atmospheric manipulations change the way the sun's radiation penetrates and reaches our skin?
Oh, absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely. I mean, when it can burn the bark off of trees, it can and is burning the bark off of trees. We see it everywhere in Northern California. We have photographs from across the country, but it's the southwest facing side, depending on the tree species. We see trees with the bark fried off from tip to trunk. I mean, it's bare core wood exposed. And this is where people, you've probably seen in a lot of the wildfires. And by the way, on the wildfire scenario, we can hang that squarely around the neck of climate engineering, cutting off precipitation. These particles are incendiaries, by the way. Aluminum nanoparticles are such a powerful incendiary that it's used in military demolitions, thermite. So what you have, and we have an engineering wildfire section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, but we can speculate again about agendas and objectives, Lahaina fire, the Palisades fires, and the rest. But the fact that climate engineering played a key role in setting the template for those fires to burn with such ferocity is beyond dispute. Source of ignition, separate subject. I'm trying to weave the tree thing into this. And you have people online, unfortunately, making claims when they see a tree with a stripe burning up the tree. They make all kinds of fantastic claims as to what did that. That's because the UV radiation has burnt the bark off of that tree. The core wood is dead and rotted. The second an ember hits it, it burns inside the tree, up the core. We see this in wildfire. I've fought wildfires front lines for a number of years on equipment and on the ground. I mean, this is something I have a background in. And that's what's causing that effect. So what we hope with people online, that they do a little more research before they start making claims, and don't distract from the climate engineering by claiming all sorts of other things they claim. That climate engineering, we can say definitively, we can prove this, is the single greatest causal factor that's setting the template for those fires to burn with such ferocity. And we found a document, Bethany, geoengineeringwatch.org, military document titled Forest Fires as a Military Weapon. I think we titled it Wildfires as a Military Weapon, but same document, 140 pages long, specifically outlining exactly the kind of preparation we see happening for these fires, cutting off the precipitation for a year or two in advance, an incendiary dust, which we know we have, blanketing structures, forest floor, and the desiccant particles that are pulling the moisture out of the flora. Everything that we see happening is described in that document, and this is even more alarming. 17 sites were cited as study sites in that document within the continental US. One of those was LA. So why would that be in a US military document? And for those that think, though, that the ones truly in control of our military are here to protect them, think again.
I know we're talking a lot about air quality with Dane right now. And so I couldn't help but just share, if you don't have an air filter, please invest in one. I have a couple Jaspers in my home. I talk about it all the time. It's the world's first air filter designed for wildfire, smoke, and mold. It is the best purifier I've ever come across. It's designed by a restoration expert, and it combines commercial grade performance with stylish design to elevate and improve your family's health. If you go to jaspr.co/digest, you'll save $200. Again, you can use my code DIGEST, save $200, or just go to jaspr.co, not .com, just .co/digest. You'll save $200, well worth every single penny. Well, I wanted to bring up the recent fires here because you're in Northern California, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously many people know about the LA fires, horrific, just happened this past January. But there's very similarities between the LA fires, the Maui fire, the Paradise fire. Were all of these, it just seems so perfect that, like you said, drought, no water to fight the fires. It just seemed so perfectly planned. Do you believe that they were on purpose? because now I'm seeing people in control wanting to create quote smart cities, 15-minute cities, all these things to just, I guess, just be in control even more.
You're correct. The short answer is yes. There's no question those fires were not any random event. There's no question. Again, source of ignition, separate subject. Many people speculate a lot on that source of ignition. You've heard the laser narrative probably, and what we encourage people to do is study that before you start to spit a narrative out. Could they ignite a fire in the ground? And again, that's a separate subject because we have to focus on what set the template for these fires to burn, and that's sort of swept under the rug when people bring up other claims. Does technology exist that could potentially, in a clear sky, ignite a fire on the ground with a laser technology? Yes. But beyond that, the claims completely leave the reservation because any type of directed energy weapon that could do what is being claimed, the closest comparable ground-based unit weighs 1.8 million pounds. It takes 18 semi-trucks to move it. That's not flying around our skies. And no laser anything works when there's particulate matter in the air. Nothing. Doesn't work. Can't work. Laws of physics dictate that. So people should study a bit more when they start making claims. And then because they're eclipsing the climate engineering issue when they make those claims, and that we can prove. We can prove that climate engineering set the template for those fires to burn. And as far as the consistency of those burns, this is where it becomes more nefarious still. It appears smart meters may be being used for ignition sources. And that's part of my background in the electrical industry. I work for Bechtel Power. Bethany, you remember the cell phones and pagers that just blew up in Syria?
Oh, yeah.
It's much easier to do something similar with a smart meter, much bigger device, has capacitors in it. And to back this up, in the Carr fire in Reading, which was a major fire in Reading, burnt down some big affluent neighborhoods, one of the owners of the Carr fire tracked me down to show me pictures. They were the last ones to leave their neighborhood. It was near dusk, and this is an affluent neighborhood. The fire had not reached the neighborhood yet, and they saw flickering inside their neighbor's home, took pictures in the front door. The interior was fully engulfed. Fire hadn't even reached that neighborhood yet. We see in the Palisades fire structures that are fully engulfed interiors, and the exteriors haven't been touched yet. How can that happen? Unless there's a source of ignition that's being used, and they would only need a small success rate to carry that fire with 80-mile-an-hour winds to blowtorch whole regions. So yes, it does appear that there's a very nefarious additional source of ignition here, and there's lawsuits for smart meters starting fires. It's not some speculative conclusion. So
I was just about to say, I did an entire reel on my Instagram about smart meters, how they were igniting fires and showing that certain homes without smart meters didn't burn.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And those, if people would stick to that solid data, climate engineering, smart meter ignitions, regardless of the other sources, any mooring with a match can flow that out, upwind and let it blow downwind, and the manipulation of those surface winds as well. When they can manipulate atmospheric pressure zones, and they can also then augment surface zonal wind flows, and that's exactly what they're doing. In Lahaina, we had an extremely anomalous high pressure zone to the north that certainly is signature ionosphere heater. We had an anomalous low pressure zone to the south, Hurricane Dora, which had a very anomalous track. So between those two, Dora spinning counterclockwise as a low pressure zone, the high pressure zone spinning clockwise. And between the two, you get a surface zonal wind field. And that's exactly what happened in Lahaina. It blowtorches things. It's called a bellows effect. So you get temperatures that are much, much higher than you would normally have in a fire. And now add the blanketing of aluminum nanoparticles. And we filmed above the Paradise fire. This is in the dimming. We filmed blanket aerosol spraying above the smoke canopy during that fire. Now, that can only be nefarious. That has nothing to do with climate engineering. We filmed it on time-lapse footage. So again, this is all-out weather warfare. And for those participating, because people can't believe our military brothers and sisters would participate in this, but they are, they're being compartmentalized. They're being told they're doing something for the common good, and they need to wake up as well. It's not an excuse just to blindly follow orders. They took an oath to protect their population from all threats, foreign and domestic. And It's time they wake up as well. Just blindly following orders is not okay.
I just got chills. I mean, now we're recording this on February 3rd, 2025. And I'm sure a lot of people remember in December of 2024, just a month or two ago, there was a lot of dust, fog, weird stuff that people were recording. Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
What is your take on that? And do you think that was a precursor for, I mean, I can't say the LA fires because it was happening everywhere in the US, but what is your take on that? What was happening?
It's directly related to climate engineering without question. So when you have an ever more desperate power structure, and they're chemically nucleating everything. It's called chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. It's an endothermic reacting element. These are patented processes seeded into cloud moisture, creates a cold, dense layer of air that descends to the surface. That's part of all the fog. Is there toxic elements in the fog? Yes, there is. And as the surface temperatures heat up and they continue to try to cool them down with ever more powerful dispersions, you're going to get that type of scenario, and we are, and a lot of people complaining at Geoengineering Watch. We're getting comments from all over the country, people getting sick from being immersed in that. We're going to see more of it. And in regard to engineering winter weather, like we just saw again in New Orleans and Florida, I would encourage your listeners to search the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, or they can just search Chinese scientists engineer snowstorm. Everybody covered it. Popular Science, Fox News, MSNBC, The Guardian, everybody. But if you bring that up here, suddenly you're a tinfoil hat wearing nutcase, because they want to marginalize people, so people are afraid to talk about the obvious. This is an emperor has no clothes moment, Bethany. I mean, you have to be willfully eyes wide shut to not see and recognize what's going on in our skies. And when I say the ramifications to this threat are immediate, I mean immediate. We're not talking about decades out. On the current course, I can't fathom how they're going to maintain this paradigm much longer. And based on statistical trajectories, we face unimaginable consequences in the coming years. Even this year, with so much unfolding, how much longer can they hide the severity of the fact that the party's over? We're circling the drain right now. And here's where it gets truly precarious. We know that there's polymer fibers and graphene in our precipitation. The last something like 100 lab tests with UC Minnesota showed both. Both of those elements are used militarily as biological carrier platforms. That means to carry a biological from the clouds to the ground. That means biological warfare. We own an audio at geoengineeringwatch.org of the world's second most recognized geoengineer describing what he did for the US Department of Defense was to spray pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. We know with COVID, we had Italian researchers identify CV-19 attached to airborne particulates. We know in one of the first waves of COVID, we had 85 countries infected in 3 days. That's indicative of an airborne dispersion. We have hundreds of biolabs around the globe experimenting with exactly this type of biological warfare. Why would we think that they wouldn't disperse something much more lethal when they feel they're losing control? We already have the dispersion platforms in the air. We already have the biological carrier elements in our air column. Why would we think they wouldn't do this?
I'm so, like, I literally still have chills. I am frustrated and furious, and I'm feeling all of the emotions right now because it's something that people need to wake up to, just like you said. And it just makes me so sick. I mean, literally. And if you're thinking about all this weather manipulation and our soil and people getting cancer and all these things, how are the people doing this to the environment? How are they themselves avoid poisoning themselves? Like,
They're
are they,
not.
or are they just poisoning
And
themselves
again,
too?
this is where, again, back to, and this is straight out of psychoanalysis manual, that the personality type, those in power, and we're talking about a psychopathic personality. I mean, they are literally, this is not speculation. That's who rises to the top, because they'll do things the rest of us won't. And the common thread in the various or the variances of that personality is a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. We have enough nuclear weaponry to exterminate humanity thousands of times over, and we're building more. We're building more right now. So again, we're not dealing with sanity, and we find ourselves again between the hammer and the anvil because the clinically insane in control, those who print the money, who ultimately control it all, that's who's controlling everything from behind the curtain. It's not the puppet we see in the White House. But we have a population that's so far been hopelessly asleep at the wheel, doesn't want to know. Don't bother me. I want to think happy thoughts. Everything just magically work itself out. Someone somewhere will expose this and deal with it. No, that's not how it works. As the proverb goes, we're the ones. This is from the Hopi elders. We're the ones we've been waiting for. It's up to us. And those in power couldn't do what they do without a population that actively or passively participates. And we know from the Milgram experiments, for your listeners that know what that is, those were very publicized experiments that prove the vast majority of the human species will do whatever they're told, including inflict lethal injury to an innocent party if they believe someone in authority is telling them to do so. That kind of mentality needs to go. Bottom line is, we need to act with a sense of morality and honor and virtue, and know that we're here for a reason. And that reason isn't just to pursue personal pleasures until our last breath. It's to make a difference for the whole, especially those with children. We owe our lives. We don't own our lives anymore. We owe it to our children and to the web of life on which our lives completely and totally depend. No web of life, no habitat, no humans, simple. And let me give a couple more statistics to make the point. The current species extinction rate right now of plant, animal, insect, and organism, about 200 to 300 species a day. 200 to 300 species are going extinct every single day. That's many of which we haven't even identified. That's statistically about 15,000 times the background rate, because you hear people say, oh, things always come and go. No, not at 15,000 times the background rate. It's 1.5% of normal. We've lost about 75% of global wildlife population, 75% in the last 40 years alone. Insects, again, down 80 to 90%. Global pelagic fish populations, the food fish, 90% gone now. Again, those who think that this is going to magically continue on for much longer need to rethink their reality.
Is there any way we can stop this? Like, obviously, people should definitely share this podcast, share it with everyone you know, watch the dimming. But is there any way we can contribute to help?
That is the best way. That is the best way. And I'm so grateful to you for your courage, and you're facing this head on. You've obviously done homework already, and I'm so grateful to you and your followers. And by pushing this issue to the full light of day, by sharing exchanges like this, or the dimming from geoengineeringwatch.org, and send out a message to media, agencies, elected officials, share with your friends, ask them to do the same. Sharing credible data from a credible source is key. At our homepage, we have printed materials, as I mentioned to you off the air. We pass those on we comp them to countless sources, congressmen and media, and we've sent out literally well into 5 figures of separate envelopes to media. I mean, 13, 14,000. This is all at our expense, but we do make them available on the homepage of Geoengineering Watch for less than our cost of producing and shipping. We're just trying to not go any farther in the red than we have to. But those materials can help start a spot fire of awareness, or from your own home computer for no cost. You can send out a link to the dimming or this exchange and ask people to please investigate, and know that this issue can't be put in the rearview mirror. Like so many other dire issues, like steel structure, high-rise buildings falling down on 9/11, that, clearly that narrative was a lie, what we were told happened then. But if people can put, even COVID, if people can put it in the rearview mirror, they will. You can't put this in the rearview mirror. It's getting worse by the day. And it's in a very nonlinear phase now. The summer we face coming up will be unlike any other, and the severity
What's
of
your
what's unfolding
prediction?
can't be overstated. So know that the seeds that you sow will be forced to sprout. Does that make sense, Bethany?
For sure. What is your prediction in this 2025 summer? What do you think? Is it going to be cooler? Is it going to be warmer?
Oh, it's not going to get cooler. And again, people need to separate this because we all love to hate Al Gore. People want to take the opposite position of him or AOC, or we need to get past that. That yes, these people are very hypocritical. All the environmental organizations, immense hypocrisy. Our attorneys at geoengineeringwatch.org spoke to attorneys from every major environmental group, WWF, Greenpeace, Sierra Club. None of them were willing to address the climate engineering issue because they didn't want to lose their nonprofit status. Well, is that not criminal hypocrisy? So we have no love for those groups, but the planet's in total meltdown. We're seeing heat index temperatures, the feels like temperature in places like Dubai, 155 degrees. Look it up. That's the feels like temperature. That's the combination of heat and humidity because the humidity is building up now and the human body can't cool itself, which pushes the heat index up and the ozone layer is disintegrating. That's a massive source of thermal radiation buildup. The planet's warming right now at the thermal energy equivalent of 13 Hiroshima bombs per second. Think about that. And we're seeing ocean. Did you see how high the ocean temperatures were in Florida last year?
No, I haven't.
102 degrees. 102, the same temperature jacuzzi recommends for their hot tubs, killed everything. Everything. The reefs, and people don't understand when the oceans heat to that degree, a cubic meter of seawater can contain 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air. It's like you put an empty pot of, or put a pot of air in your stove with a lid on it, and you turn the heat on, it'll heat up almost instantly. Put ice water in there. It takes a lot longer. But once that heats up, there's a tremendous amount of energy there. Nothing's adapted to live under these conditions. So again, what I would stress is that we need to reprioritize. Why are we here? Are we here to take Caribbean cruises and Disney World vacations, or are we here to try to protect something for our posterity in the web of life? And once we make the correct decision there, then this mission becomes much more clear, and people shouldn't underestimate their ability to make a difference. Because any one of us, as the editor for the Dimming placed at the end of that film, what I stated on a broadcast was any one of us could be the final pebble that triggers the landslide of awakening. And if we can push this issue to light, Bethany, the fur will fly. We will alter the equation. We're not out of the woods, but we will have taken a giant leap in the right direction. And all of us can be a part of that.
I highly encourage everyone listening, every single person listening, share this episode, send it to everyone you know, share it on your Instagram, include the link. Every single person needs to listen to this. And, thinking about the weather manipulation, if they can manipulate the weather to make it drought, why can't they do the opposite when we need rain? When the fires are happening, why can't they make it rain? You'd think that they would, if they have the ability, or you would think, why aren't they?
You're totally correct. I mean, what an elemental conclusion. You're completely correct. Why don't more come to that conclusion? When we had this power in the 60s to augment rainfall at will and deluge whatever they wanted to deluge, of course they can do that. Of course they could if they chose to. It's a perfect question. Thank you for bringing that up. At minimum, we know that. We can see on satellite imagery, they're doing exactly the opposite. They're cutting off the precipitation that's coming in from the Pacific and drying these regions out. The LA region hadn't had rain for almost a year before that fire happened. In fact, if you look at presentations I did going back over a decade, engineered drought catastrophe, target California, everything I said has happened. And they know this is, California officials know this is going on. I have had private meetings with Gavin Newsom in the Capitol with his top aide. He absolutely knows this is going on. That people like Gavin Newsom are absolutely a tool for the matrix. They do whatever they feel will advance their own personal paradigm. They don't give a damn about moral anything. He knows this is going on. I've had private meetings with top EPA officials at the Capitol, ranged by congressional reps. They all know. So again, bottom line, it's up to us to push this issue to the full light of day. But you're completely correct. At bare minimum, they could have prevented that from ever happening. Period.
Yeah, it's saddening. I mean, for lack of a better word here.
Enraging, absolutely enraging. And those people, we hope that some of those people, we're distributing materials to some in that area and trying to get them to distribute as well. Unfortunately, some people that go through a disaster like that are so beat down that they don't even want to face reality. And we've had chemical cool down events, Bethany. Like, for example, this is an extreme of what just happened in New Orleans and Florida. In 2013, we had 100,000 cattle in South Dakota flash froze to death. This is October 4th. This is just going into autumn in South Dakota, cold hardy cattle. Why is it snowing on October 4th when it was at the same time we captured the weather maps, same time this flash freeze snowstorm killed 100,000 cattle? It was 85 degrees and raining in Chicago. 85 was 89 and raining in Kansas City. How in the hell could there be a snowstorm kill 100,000 cattle? But it did. Chemically nucleated. It was just an experiment of some kind. They're all laying around in the mud 2 days later. And we contacted the Ranchers Association to try to tell them about climate engineering. They didn't want to know. They just didn't want to know. And so the same is true with some of the residents in Palisades or anywhere else, is sometimes they feel so beat down they don't have any fight left. They need to summon enough fortitude to investigate, to know that they were literally assaulted. This is weather warfare, period.
Oh, man. I mean, I hate for this podcast to be all like doom and gloom. Is there any way we can help ourselves detox of what's going on? I know, we can only do so much, but do you have any tips for us?
Yes. Chelation is essential. Yes. And again, I know I paint a very dark picture because so many sources always end with, well, just, buy a solar panel and a Prius and we'll all live happily ever after. That's not how this story ends. But yes, we can stay reasonably healthy through this by chelating constantly. And I encourage people to.
Can you explain what that is?
It's various elements that you can consume that are effective at freeing up these bioavailable materials like aluminum, which tends to adhere to cell receptors like a plaque. So it's easily absorbed and hard to get rid of. But chelating elements can be even things like calcium, vitamin C. There's other elements that are more effective, but it has to be done carefully. You don't want to free up too many of these elements too fast, or you can do more damage than good. So talk to a nutritionalist, but chelating, keeping your body more alkaline, there are things you can definitely do to stay healthy as possible through this. And by the way, for the elite, we know that they have very technologically advanced chelation programs. We spoke to a researcher that made it into one of those in Germany, where they're put on a table and their blood is literally circulated out of their system, chelated and put back with the elements taken out. This is not available to the rest of us. So they do have their own methods of.
They have access to.
Yes, they do. But for the rest of us, chelation can very much help. And again, if you share credible data from a credible source, don't overreach with what your limit of knowledge might be in the subject, but stick to the building blocks. We're breathing what they're spraying, period. We have film footage to prove it, lab testing to prove it. Stick to the basic building blocks. Try to wake those up around you, get them to do the same. If we can force this issue to the full light of day and stop these operations, free the planet up from this climate engineering straitjacket, allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done, we would at minimum buy time, and that's worth fighting for.
Okay. What do you do to detox? Do you do hyperbaric chamber? Do you do any kind of supplements specific?
Lots of supplements, lots of resistance and cardio. The more you can perspire, the better. I am very fortunate to have a clean water source. That's key. And it's all the above in that arena. And I mean, when I supplements, I take about, 30 something pills a day, but those are food supplements too. It's not just vitamins. I mean, you obviously don't want to overdo vitamins. You got to be careful in that arena too. If you take too much of one, you deplete another. Amino acids, those are all key elements. But again, I would speak to a nutritionalist and for each individual to tailor a program for them. But chelation can be very, very helpful. And obviously avoid the processed food anything, which contains many of the polymers that is also in our air column. I mean, there's no organic anything at this point. That's a given. Even inside a greenhouse, we know that these elements migrate into those regions as well because they're so small. To put this into perspective, a nanoparticle is so small. It's inconceivably small. You can fit 100,000 nanoparticles across the width of a single human hair. Think about that. And the smaller the particle is, the more insidious it is. So again, what they're dispersing in our skies with what we absolutely know to be in this mix is biological warfare, even without the additional engineered pathogen put in, just the elements we know are there from our testing. This is absolutely an all-out assault, and we have to deal with this. That's why we're so focused on this at geoengineeringwatch.org, because if we don't deal with this hole in the bottom of the boat, nothing else matters. No other cause, no other concern. All of it becomes moot. So we need to prioritize. And as we state, if your head's on fire, you have to ignore your stub toe and your skin knee. You have to deal with the head part, right? And for those that want to turn their back, another example I give often too is if you're standing in the freeway at rush hour, are you better off facing traffic or turning your back to it? So we need to face this issue head on. And thank you for doing so. I'm very honored to have connected. I'm very grateful to you for your voice in this battle.
Oh, for sure. I mean, everyone, again, I cannot stress enough, go look up this documentary, The Dimming, on YouTube. Share this podcast with everyone you know. Take notes, save this podcast so you can re-listen to it for all these tips and what to do. Thank you so much, Dane, for coming on. You're always welcome back, and we'll hopefully help get the word out to millions.
Thank you. My deepest gratitude to you, Bethany, and all your followers. It's a team effort in this fight.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Digest This. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review in your podcast app to let us know. If you're ever wondering how you can support me and this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family is the best way. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson and edited by Mike Fry. To check out more shows by my team, go to wellnessloud.com, and to email the show, message us at digestthispod@gmail.com. See you next time. The content of this show is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for individual medical and mental health advice and does not constitute a provider-patient relationship. As always, talk to your doctor or health team first.